All right. Welcome back to episode 198 of the Comic Watchers. My name is Chad Burnett. I am flying solo again tonight. Matt had other things that came up and he had to do, but that's okay. We're going to have a great show because we have Tom Scioli here, and we're going to talk about his latest work, I Am Stan. We're going to talk some Star Warriors, and some Witchmen. So let me stop talking and bring him in. We'll find out what he's about him and what he's been up to. Hi,
Hey,
Tom. How's
Chad.
it going?
Real good.
um, glad to talk to you again. I know you and I talked back in 2020 when during that crazy time when there was that pandemic and
Yeah, that's
you
a long time ago.
you had the at that time you just had the epic life of Jack Kirby that had come out and I think if I remember correctly, you had like a free comic book thing that you were supposed to do, and that really didn't happen. And
Yeah. Free comic book day became like free comic book summer, and yeah, it kind of lessened the impact of it, but it was something.
well, but before we get into everything here, I like to find out a little bit about you know you as a creator and as a comic book reader. What is your history with as a reader with the comic book hobby?
Yeah, I mean, I've just been interested in comic books and uh, superheroes and stuff like that. Just since I was a little kid. Why? It's sort of like the entry point was all the TV shows and cartoons, the Adam West Batman, the Super Friends, um, the Christopher Reeve Superman movies and stuff. That was kind of those things were all either like still going on or in rerun or whatever when I was my earliest memory. So I was really into that stuff. And then yeah, you'd go to 7-Eleven or something, and then there's more superheroes. And you can view them on your own time. You don't have to wait until the right moment for them to show up on TV.
And do you remember, the first comic book that you maybe picked up yourself or you remember reading?
Yeah, I mean, I know like I had like those little comics that came with like the He-Man figures.
Yes.
And also I remember looking through the Star Wars like treasury, like the giant like my cousin had it or something. And I was just like looking at it on the floor, and that was an early one. But I mean, all that stuff's so early, I can't quite pinpoint, what the exact thing would be.
No, that's fine. Do you remember, the first one you remember, who were the characters? Was it I don't know.
Yeah, it would be like, it's like I loved Superman and yeah, I mean Star Wars. I had a bunch of different. By the time I started getting my own comics, I had a couple different Star Wars. I had like it was like a little digest of Star Wars stories, and it was like a little sort of like the size of like a paperback novel, and it was a bunch of like British Star Wars stories that were really good. They were really like they were better than average Star Wars comics. They were written by Archie Goodwin, and they were done for like the Marvel UK, but somehow they ended up, they I guess they felt they were strong enough or whatever, but they were sort of packaged as their own thing in the US, and so that was like a really early one. Um, yeah, had some like random Superman stuff. They just kind of they just kind of end up in my life somehow. Like, I'm not quite sure how they got there. And then others, like, at that time, if I saw something Star Wars, I would, kind of, pester my parents for it. So that's probably how some of that stuff got in too.
So, what was kind of the influence that said, I enjoy reading this, I enjoy this medium. I kind of want to get into it myself.
Yeah, I mean, it was always an option. Like it was always something, like I sort of had a range of, different career ideas, and that was always one of them. And I liked to draw from an early age, and so that was one that is sort of obvious, like, oh, well, okay, there's a career where you can draw. Like when you're a kid, you don't see, all the different places you can draw, but comics was definitely one of them.
And so, what was your first, introduction or your first thing that you did for, in comics that kind of got you into the industry, I guess is the word I'm
Oh, the
looking for.
industry. Yeah, I mean, that was that was a good bit later. That was I guess like when I was in college, I I was making like animated films, and I was also, messing around with comics, but I'd never like published anything. And then I got together with some guys, and we made this like self-published like comics zine uh, called Codex Pop. And then we did a couple issues of that, and then eventually everybody else kind of like moved on to other things, but I was kind of like the last man standing with that. And then I started just turning it into just my own, it sort of segued into my own stuff, with which eventually became the Myth of Eight Opus, which I applied for the Xeric grant to get that published. It was Peter Laird's grant that he had set up to help people get started with comics, and I applied for that and got it. And so then that was, I was self-publishing that, and for the first time distributing a comic through Diamond. Before, it was just kind of like, print up a bunch of these and then try selling them at stores or comic conventions or whatever. But that was like getting it distributed. And then from there, I just kind of sent copies of that to various people. And one of the people I sent it to was Eric Larson at Image, and he was somebody who sort of picked up on it and helped me get like some of my first jobs in comics.
Well, I think one of the first times I was exposed to your work was it was either the GoBots or the GI Joe Transformers series. I believe you did for IDW. So
Yeah,
I'm sure that was probably
that was
further on in
many
your.
years later. That was pretty deep into my career, and it was kind of at that point, like before those ones came out, I did sort of reach like a point of frustration, because I never, like, all the time that I worked in comics, I do like this over here and that over there, but I always wanted to do like work on like a franchise, like, and I figured that would sort of come earlier in my career, and then I sort of move over to like my own stuff or whatever. But like I still hadn't had any kind of substantial run on any other property, and it was and then I got that Transformers versus GI Joe, and it was like, okay, finally I get to do what I had envisioned, which would be like, okay, here's this, now start making these, and so I got to do that for a couple of years, and it was really fun. And then I got to do GoBot. So that was kind of that was like the beginning of like a different phase of my career, which I'm kind of still in, where it went from because up to that point I was working a day job too. So that was where I went from being sort of part-time cartoonist to full-time cartoonist.
And so let's get right into your current work. I Am Stan. It's the biography of Stan Lee. Kind of tell us about what. Obviously, it's about Stan Lee, duh. But kind of tell us about what kind of influenced you to make do this type of because like I mentioned earlier, you did the Jack Kirby biography.
Yeah, it was just like a natural next step after the Jack Kirby comic. It was just almost like the path of least resistance. You do a Jack Kirby comic and it's like, what are you going to do next? And it's like, Stan Lee is a pretty natural next step. So it was, and again, I like after I finished the Jack Kirby book, I'd sort of, covered a lot of that, just that world of like comics publishing, and Stan was, definitely a big presence in the Jack Kirby book. So I wasn't quite ready to do a Stan Lee book right off the bat. But I sort of spent some time, worked on a couple different things, as I was doing that, the sort of Stan Lee story had just been sort of, gestating in my brain. And so until I reached a point where I was like emotionally ready for it, and that it had sort of like grown into something that I'm like, yeah, that's a way to sort of tell the story of Stan Lee.
And in telling the story of Stan Lee, what did you use as your sources? Because I know there's a lot of different, you know, biographies about him, and and the Marvel, history of
Yeah,
Marvel.
there's just so much. Like, yeah, like you said, there's many books written about him. There's a ton of, video, of audio, interviews. Like, there's just so much. I mean, and he was somebody who was not shy,
I was going
and
to say
sort of
he did like to talk about himself, so there's
yeah,
probably hard to find information.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the tough thing is that he was so media savvy that it was kind of hard to sort of pierce that surface, that
Hmm.
he had sort of built up like a sort of finely crafted um, persona and surface that it was a little difficult to crack that surface. But yeah, there was just a ton, a ton of material out there.
And when you were laying out, because I know in the in the comic he kind of start kind of later on when he's doing, I think it was a game show. And I can't think of the game show right now, but you kind of start there and then kind of work back. How did you go about laying that out to tell his story?
Yeah, I mean those were just kind of moments that really kind of stood out to me as like just interesting highlights and very like sort of telling, like that game show moment. It was either what's my line or like I've got a secret or something. It was like one of
Yeah,
those like
yeah.
yeah, one of those game shows where you come on and it's like which like I saw what there's which one of these guys is Stan Lee, the publisher of Marvel Comics, and then I saw one where it was like which one of these guys is David Prowse, the man who dresses up as Darth Vader in the Star Wars movies, like they'd have things like that. Um, but that was like a really interesting moment because it kind of set up it kind of encapsulates a lot of the issues in Stan's life of sort of just sort of comics being and his role in comics being sort of misunderstood, and him sort of trying to present this surface and sort of educate, but then also having like a certain discomfort with with like the understanding that what he was doing was not was kind of baffling to some people. So it was just like this very interesting moment. So there were a couple moments like that I chose to really sort of tell the larger story of Stan.
Now, when you were doing your research for this, were there anything that you learned or anything that you found really interesting that maybe you didn't know about him before?
Yeah, really like a lot of stuff because when I was doing the Jack Kirby book, I I was sort of going into that as like a Jack Kirby scholar and a Jack Kirby super fan. Like I'd already spent so much time, studying like every era of his career, every facet of
Hold
it.
on, you're a
Where
Jack
Stan
you,
Lee,
you, you're a Jack Kirby fan. I would.
yeah, exactly, yeah, hard to believe. I hope you're sitting down when I tell you that I'm a Jack Kirby fan. Um, and and so Stan Lee, like I'm more like I'm more sort of aware of him in the way that sort of everybody is, but then particularly how he like how his story intersects with Kirby. But then
Hmm.
the points in time where his story and Jack's story diverge, I went into that book less conversant in that stuff. So I sort of like, what was Stan up to, all through the 40s after, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby leave Marvel? Like, what was he up to during the 40s? What was he up to during the 50s before Jack sort of, stops by again to work at Marvel for a little bit, things like that.
Hmm. So how long does it take you to do a project like this, from, starting the research to drawing and writing and just getting everything from your, head to the page?
Yeah, it's hard to say because it's such a long gestation process. Like I'd say it was like 3 years, but I didn't immediately start on a Stan Lee book, in as soon as I finished the Jack Kirby book. But I kind of, had some notion, like it was one of many different potential projects I was working on. So it kind of started there, but then I guess it would be like 2 years of like really solid work. So like,
Hmm.
and the research never stops because at a certain point you have to start executing the book. So it's maybe like a year of actually like drawing the pictures and writing, the words that show up in there. But even during that time, there's still a ton of research going on. I have to sometimes, scrap a page, or change something, or add fold something back in the mix. But it really, like and I kind of work that way on everything. Like if I come up with a better idea or a better approach, or some new piece of information comes in that wasn't part of the plan, it kind of, I have to make it part of the plan.
Yeah. Did that happen during this process?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there were some like real world things and stuff that kind of changed because it was still, I mean, Stan had already passed away by the time I
Yeah.
started this, but there was different stories surfacing, different news, different bits and things that kind of changed the course of it. And then yeah, just like my understanding of Stan, sometimes you sort of have a some famous story that you've heard for a long time or something like, and then that you think the truth about, and then you find some piece of information or something that kind of gives you a different view of it.
So what was, as you mentioned, can you mention one of those instances that kind of, you had that, I guess, preconceived notion, and then you got that other, view.
Yeah, I mean, just some of the early Marvel stuff because there's things about like I guess like this the relationship between Stan and Steve Ditko, because they're all Stan sort of told his perspective, and then Ditko's told his perspective, and then Ditko had some like um, he had these like sort of obscure self-published comics and books and essays and things that like as I was sort of digging through them, it's like, oh, there's here's a really interesting account of like why he left Spider-Man that's very at odds with Stan's account, and so like that that's one that just sort of comes to mind.
Oh, that's when I was, first, my first read through of, I Am Stan. I was like, okay, am I going to see, something that kind of harkens back to something I, read in the Jack Kirby book, and kind of,
Right. Yeah, I mean,
um,
yeah, that was a challenge because I didn't I like this is Stan, this is a different perspective. It's Stan's perspective, and I mean, like the book isn't told from Stan's point of view, but it's a different perspective. But I also didn't want to. I mean, I didn't want to like contradict anything that happened. Like I didn't want either book to contradict the other, but and I felt like there was enough sort of room for like a different perspective, but not necessarily like a refutation.
mhm. No, I completely, I mean, and it's probably hard, especially with, what has been told about the relationship between the two, balancing those two out and trying not to, I guess, take a side or.
Right, exactly. Like I really worked very hard to just just follow where the trail leads me, like not, keep myself out of the equation as much as possible. So it is like it reads very differently from any of my other comics, and it looks very different from any of my other comics. And like and I'm very proud of that. Like I want each comic to be sort of tailor made for the subject. But I did because I do have strong feelings about a lot of this stuff, and some my own perspective about, and some things where it's like some hunches I have about things that like I can't include in the book because they're just hunches. They're not
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Trying to keep, like I said, be objective and kind of
for
not
sure. Yeah.
take sides and just follow what the information that you can back up.
Yeah, you're not doing anybody any favors. You're not doing Stan any favors. You're not doing Jack any favors. Like you want to be like serve the truth. Like
Yeah, definitely. So now that you have these two biography books under your belt, are you kind of thinking about the next one, or kind of seeing, because we have your other projects that we're going to talk about, but
yeah,
you
sure.
know is this kind of something you kind of want to explore further with other creators that you've come to know? And
Yeah, I mean, it is something that interests me, and it is like I really enjoyed the process of working on both of these books, and I feel like I've gotten really good at this kind of story. Like these really work. Like I hadn't done anything like these two books before, so I would like to take on more. I'm not ready to take it on right at this moment, but
Mhm.
who knows? Maybe like a couple months from now or something. But yeah, I see some more books like this in my future. I don't know if it would necessarily focus on one person the way these two like I'm not sure like who a good candidate would be, like other than those two. I mean, Ditko is sort of the natural one that I thought of, that people have suggested, that asked me about and stuff, and he would be interesting, but I don't know if that's necessarily the right subject or not, for like it's something for me to consider that I haven't
Huh.
you know
I was thinking Steve Ditko too, but I'll go with somebody that maybe you haven't been suggested. Bill Finger.
Bill Finger. Yeah, I mean, there was like a really good documentary about Bill
Hmm.
Finger. He is an interesting one. It would a lot of that. I mean, I know a certain amount about Bill Finger, and I've enjoyed certain things of his work, and and he would sort of pop up in interesting places too. Like I think he wrote like an episode or two of the Batman TV series. He would be an interesting one, but it would be very new. It would be very new for me.
Hmm.
I'd learn a lot. I mean, I learned a lot in the process of making all these books, but I think I would learn a considerable amount for about Bill Finger. I mean, before I did the Stan Lee book, I did pitch the idea of doing an Otto Binder book, which, I mean, he is kind of in along the lines of Bill Finger, but it's just so obscure. Like his Otto Binder's at least Stan and Jack did work in like the 60s, and then Jack in the 70s, and Stan less so in the 70s. But then Stan is sort of he was like a figure in all the in the movies, and he was part of, the .com bubble and all that kind of stuff. So like, but like Otto Binder, his, the height of his fame was like the 40s and early 50s. So that's kind of a tough sell. I think the audience for that is it's definitely a niche audience. But again, like I like the idea of taking somebody that like is maybe known in sort of comics circles, but is completely unknown, in just sort of like in terms of like household name or whatever, and then introducing, like I find that interesting, but it's hard to get a publisher to like sign off on this guy that like maybe they never even heard of.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we've, kind of talked about how you're influenced by Jack Kirby and all that, and you're working on Star Warriors, which is one of his properties. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was this comic. It was one of the first comic books he did, and it was the first comic book that he signed as Jack Kirby. It was super obscure. It was the last story in Crash Comics, which was the way comic books were back then. It would be a bunch of different stories, and his was like the very last. And on the cover, like they mention every story, every comic that's in there except for Solar Legion is what it was called back then. So it was like that's how buried it was. But just sort of reading it's so strong. Like it's such a great story and just beautiful drawings, beautiful words, and it just was such of a piece with like Jack Kirby's later work. And I was kind of struck by that, the most recent time that I read it, where like sort of previous readings, I was just kind of like, oh, here's a little curiosity. Here's some, oddball comic that Jack Kirby did. But this time around, I was like, this is so strong, and it's sort of buried in time. It's kind of like the colors that are used, and the kind of like the inking and the sort of panel layouts, which are very like antiquated, very of that era. And I thought, if you just kind of take the pictures, take the words, and kind of just give them a little room to breathe, this thing will really come alive. So that was the idea behind it. And so now it's like, here it is, Jack, this great work from Jack Kirby that was kind of spread out between a couple different issues and things. Just here it is, crystallized, for a modern audience.
So, for somebody who might be watching this and not know what Warriors is, can you kind of give a summary or brief, overview of
it's
the story?
Star Warriors: The Adventures of Adam Starr and the Solar Legion, and it's Starr with 2 R's. But he's this. It's the future, and he's a pirate hunter. That basically, space pirates have made interstellar travel and interstellar commerce just incredibly dangerous, and Adam Starr put together this group called the Solar Legion to combat space pirates, and they're just really gaining ground. And he's kind of he's got this like sort of ruthless attitude towards, like, he'll drop these like nuclear bombs on their bases and things like that. He doesn't take prisoners, and so it's kind of the story of the Solar Legion and what they do, and the founding of the Solar Legion, and his sort of ongoing war with space pirates.
As we've kind of talked, Jack Kirby seems to be a very big influence on you and your work, and I enjoyed following your Jacktober on Facebook, your take on the Inktober, and
Right. Yeah.
I would kill for that, Commandy. But what is it about what is it about Jack Kirby that resonated with you and made you want to style you? I style yourself after that.
Yeah, I mean, it just really spoke to me. Like I just, felt a real connection to just like the stories, the the world, like that. Just talking about the Solar Legion stuff, like that. Just that, I love science fiction. I love space opera. I grew up on Star Wars, on He-Man, Thundar, all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like when I started, really delving into Jack Kirby's work, just sort of discovering it and getting deeper into it. It's like, oh, here's like the crystallized, like the source of this stuff, and maybe, not all of these things are necessarily, copying Jack Kirby, although some are. It just felt like, oh, all this stuff that I love, there was a guy doing an even better version of that before all this stuff, and just everything about like the look of his worlds. Like I love, especially like, his things like New Gods and Thor and the Eternals. I love that sort of, and I always love this like fusion of like futuristic alien space stuff and then like ancient, temples and this sort of, the past and the future kind of melded together. So that really spoke to me. And then just like the characters and the story and the melodrama and Jack Kirby's best stuff, just it's these sort of complete worlds that are populated by just all these characters that are all, connected in different ways and sort of live like a very real life, like hopes and dreams. And then the sprawl of Jack Kirby stuff. I like that there's just so much of it. Like I never hit like a wall with it because it's like, there's some, creators or whatever where you sort of check out their work and maybe they have like, a handful of like just really great stuff and then it kind of fizzles out, or maybe like a smaller body of work or something. But with Kirby, it just like kept going and going. And it's like, you sort of start in like the 60s and 70s and then you branch out. It's like, oh, there's really cool stuff in the 40s. There's really cool stuff in the 80s. There's, cool stuff like, so there's just all these little, like I'm always discovering new things. And then he had this whole, like animation career where he did stuff like Thundar the Barbarian and things. But then there's all these like, rejected pitches and things and just treasure troves of like drawings that he was doing at that period that again, every now and then some new thing pops out. Like just a few months ago, the Jack Kirby Collector published a like Jack Kirby drawing of Tron, like that I guess they were pitching like a Tron Saturday morning cartoon in the early 80s. And like, I was like, I had no idea that somewhere there was a Jack Kirby drawing of Tron. It kind of blew my mind.
So, as we, you love, how did Jack Kirby and all that influence one of your current projects, which you're currently kickstarting, Witchman?
Witchman, yeah. When I was working on the Jack Kirby book and the Stan Lee book, I spend a lot of time looking at Golden Age comics and kind of seeing them through, Jack Kirby's eyes and through Stan Lee's eyes. And in both of those books, I would get so jealous of these guys getting to work in the Golden Age where it was kind of like anything goes and you're kind of like inventing the language of comics. And, like for Jack, there was, just a bunch of different things. And then for Stan, like he worked on a character, Jack Frost, who was kind of like, you got the Human Torch and he's fire. And then Jack Frost is like ice. And it's, and the stuff's just like so simple, but like really like impactful. And so I wanted to do stuff like that. So I started doing, and this was like largely during the pandemic. I was doing what I called New Golden Age comics, which I think recently DC started making a thing called New Golden Age comics. So I don't know if I still want to call them that, but it was like just that like now is the Golden Age. And so doing things that are like that are just so that have like a really strong and simple visual impact, and like the stories just roll on. So I did a comic called Young Zeus. I did a comic called Super Tiger, like just all that kind of stuff. And then Witchman sort of came out of that. I was like, just thinking of like these characters that are kind of have that like raw visual impact of like sort of like a scary image, but then are superheroes, and like just sort of deconstructing that, and like Witchman was just like, yeah, it's like super simple, but like just a very powerful visual, and just sort of like letting that thing go, like letting it go out. So it was it sort of came out of that kind of like golden age aesthetic, but they're not like retro comics. I'm not trying to like mimic or ape like a golden age production. There is some golden age flavor to it, but it's told, the layouts are kind of like very modern, very like it's like, again, it's like now is the golden age. It's like it's stuff for 2023 and 2024.
So tell us a little bit more about Witchman. Witchman, is this a mini series that you're currently working on, or is it something that you hopes to kind of keep going?
Yeah, I mean, it really is conceived as like just a done in one comic. It's like,
Okay.
I want to make a just like a complete statement in a comic book, like the and I really did I enjoyed doing that with Jack Kirby's Star Warriors, that you can like make a comic book that is like just a satisfying unit, like where in maybe the past, I don't know, 30 years, that concept, especially for like superheroes and mainstream stuff, kind of went out the window. That started calling them floppies and stuff, and they kept getting printed on like worse and worse sort of paper. They'd get like thinner and flimsier, and like the ink comes off on your fingers and stuff, and the stories are like completely throwaway. Like I mean, I'm one of those people who keeps coming back to the comic book store, keeps trying new things, and keeps every now and then there's something like from the mainstream that I'm like, oh, that looks like it could be interesting, and I'm almost like uniformly disappointed and disgusted and like, why did I buy this? But again, like I keep I keep coming back for more, but it's like where you're like almost angry at the comic because it you got tricked by it. And so like I want to make a comic that's like the opposite of that, where you're like wow, I want to like read this thing 100 times. I want to maybe get an extra copy and like put it on the wall and frame it. Like I want to make a comic that's a complete experience. So and again, I always leave open the option of like, okay, if I do this comic and then I still have more stories to tell, maybe I'll do a sequel or whatever. But for now, it's like I'm doing Witchman, and and this is like the ultimate expression of Witchman in like a I don't know if on the kick I don't recall whether or not on the Kickstarter I listed an exact page count, but I'm shooting for like a 48 page, shooting for like a Dark Knight Returns length, of like one of those chapters of Dark Knight Returns, like that length of story. But we'll see as it sort of shakes out. I just want to make the best possible thing, but that's what I'm aiming for, is like a 48 page story.
And is this your first experience with Kickstarter and the whole crowdfunding?
Yes, it is. It's again, it's like it's one of those things. Like there've been a lot of points in my career where I've kind of, the different things that I've tried, didn't, quite work out the way I wanted them to, or things like that. And then I was sort of like forced to try something that wouldn't have been my first choice, and then it ends up, being like the greatest thing ever. And so this is kind of that. Like, like I don't think there's much, interest from various publishers to like to like publish your weird superhero ideas. Like if you came to a publisher with like, oh, here's something that could become a Netflix show, like like if you have your kind of like, I mean, you sort of know what I'm talking about, like the sort of things that like the publishers tend to go with, where it's like conceptually
something that can be done across different platforms.
Exactly. It's like, oh well, yeah, you would, you wouldn't need to worry about the budget. It wouldn't have to be animated. It would, you could just, but like I don't see people saying like, oh, here's my new superhero. Here's blank man or blank woman or blank, it's always it's always like a little more like too cool for school, where I'm like, no, I want to do like superheroes where like the first word in their name is super, or the last word in their name is man or woman or something. Like I want to get, I want to do golden age comics. And so it's kind of like, does anybody want to publish my golden age comics? No? Well, then I'll do it myself, So this was it. And it does feel like I've sort of come full circle in a way, because I started with the Xeric grant, and it was kind of like, they give you some money to like, do your thing, get it, tell your, make your dream project or whatever. And this is kind of, there's definitely some differences and differences of intent and stuff, but it's more or less like, okay, here's a way to, get, the money to like, put together this thing and get it out there that really wouldn't have gotten out there any other way. Like I've started and finished, a bunch of projects, that never got to print and things. And I'm not sure that, Witchman would have been finished, let alone like finished and come to print, if it wasn't for this. If it was like it's kind of like, usually what happens with me is I come up with something, I'm really interested, I'm really into it, but if I don't get like a, publisher or somebody to be like, okay, where's that book? Then it, like, I never finish it, because usually what happens is I come up with like the next idea and then go whole hog on that, and it just keeps going until, something gets published. But with this, it's like, okay, it's like, I gotta produce this book now. Like it's reached its goal, so time to produce this book. And now I'm like laser focused on Witchman. Like it's not, and that's all I needed. That's all I needed was just some kind of like little bit of structure, a little bit of like, okay, people are waiting for this book to like, get me to, and that's what I want to do. I want to finish books. It's just like, if it's not going to end up as a book, it's hard to do all that work and be like, I relate to like the Beatles, like when you're watching that new, or not new, but like that Let It Be or Get Back movie, and they're kind of like, okay, we go in the studio, we make these albums, we don't tour or anything, and so then it's like, okay, then we come back again and like make the next album. Like why are we doing it? And it's kind of like that. It's like I kept making these comics, but then they didn't come out as comics. So it's like, why am I like, I gotta break this cycle somehow. So like this is how I'm getting it out there.
And are you, surprised by the response that you've gotten through the Kickstarter community, I guess?
Yeah, it's like it feels like magic. Like it's kind of like, you sort of, you launch the thing, and then it's like, yeah, people are into it. People want it. It is amazing. Like, and it's something I've been aware of Kickstarter for a really long time, and I've seen people do successful Kickstarters, and I know people, I have friends who've done successful Kickstarters and stuff. Like I've known it was there, but I don't like, it was just like something about it just was like kind of scary or something. Like, I don't know. And now that I'm doing it, I'm like, what was I scared of? This is perfectly natural. And for somebody like me who has, self-published in the past and can do, like I don't need anybody else in the process. I write, I draw, I color, I letter. Like it's actually kind of the perfect, way to get something out there for me.
Now, just kind of, talking about your drawing and coloring, do you work digitally, or do you work on, with paper and pen, or both?
Yeah, I mean, the Stan Lee book was the first book that I did entirely digitally, and then everything I've done since then has been entirely digital. Like those various like comics that I made and stuff during the pandemic, and then Witchman is 100% digital. I gradually made that change because I would color digitally, like first I colored digitally, for years and years and years. And then I started doing like layouts digitally. And then it was sort of like the first step and the last step were done digitally. And then little by little, it just kind of creeped inward to where it's like, why don't I just do the whole thing digitally? And then I don't have to worry about like a scanner and cleaning the scanner and making sure like flecks of dust and stuff don't get in. And then also like when you're transferring an image from one thing to another, like, it's kind of the same as Kickstarter or crowdfunding in general, where it was like, I was just sort of working the way I'd always worked. And then it's like, there's this new thing that like is just so much, just makes so much sense. And it was just a matter of mentally making that jump, and then you can like actually make that jump.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, as we, start to wrap up here, is there anything else that maybe you wanted to talk about that you're working on, or you wanted to mention that to let people know about?
Yeah, I mean, for now, it's like, it's all Witchman. And then once, like that's, Jacktober, I was doing those Jacktober drawings one a day. But now, now that that's over, like Witchman is the only thing for me for like the foreseeable future. And then like once the campaign like fully ends, then it's like, okay, like it really is like just purely Witchman. Like it's just going to be that, like finishing it, printing it, stuff in the envelopes, mailing it out. Like it's going to be all Witchman. But I mean, the other thing would just be my my YouTube channel, the Total Recall Show, where we have like a couple years worth of shows at this point, and it's like comic book reviews, it's movie reviews, music, just all kinds of pop culture stuff. And probably once the Kickstarter ends, there's probably going to be less of that because I'm just going to be so like laser focused on Witchman. But there's, if you haven't checked the show out yet, there's like a ton of stuff there.
Very nice. Well, I know, like I said, I really enjoyed your G.I. Joe Transformers go, because I'm a kid of the '80s too, and I can hear you talk about mention your love for Star Wars. I would just love to see you have the chance to kind of do something in that universe too. I think that would be.
I'd love that too. Yeah, Star Wars, Star Trek. Like when IDW had the license, there were we did because I did Transformers and GoBots and G.I. Joe through IDW. So there was like a little talk here and there doing something Star Wars or Star Trek. And I mean, the thing is, like, it would be so much fun, but these like licensors, I had really good luck with Hasbro, but some of these licensors are have like a reputation. So like Star Wars definitely has a reputation, but man, I'd love to. I've done like a couple sort of unofficial, sort of Star Wars kind of things. But yeah, that would be a dream come true. And Transformers and G.I. Joe and GoBots, that was like a dream come true too. Like I grew up with all that. Like Star Wars came first, and it was like Star Wars, Thundar the Barbarian, and then it was just a year later between Thundar and He-Man. But like He-Man feels so much more recent than Thundar, and then G.I. Joe and then Transformers, like they feel even more recent, but they were still like huge parts of my childhood. In some ways, I feel like Transformers, like the Transformers cartoon, the G1 cartoon was like the modern mythology. That was like the mythology of my childhood, where you tune in every day and get some like new piece of the puzzle. It felt very like of our time. Like it was just, it kind of fit the 80s perfectly. And then when it with the Transformers movie, when it moved into the future year of 2005 and stuff, and then the cartoon, the TV show followed suit, it just felt like, wow, like this thing just keep moving forward. And I thought it was going to be with me my whole life. Like I thought it's like, okay, we're just going to keep going and go, and then it gets canceled, it's gone, and then like it wasn't that many years before it kind of came back, like with Beast Wars and stuff. And then even before Beast Wars, there was sort of like the Generation 2, where they kind of like repackaged the Generation 1 stuff. But it just like it was enough.
they had the transition screen.
Right, exactly. They'd have this like border and like where it would like zoom in, zoom out with all this electronics. But like by that point, it felt like they like cut the cord and I'd like lost my connection to this thing.
So, where can people find you, your work? I mean, you mentioned the YouTube's, your
Yeah, the
YouTube.
Total Recall show on YouTube. Go to Kickstarter and search Witchman. There's still a few more days left to get on board and get involved with it. And then my Instagram at Tom_Scioli, my Twitter at Tom Scioli, Facebook. Those the usual places you find people.
Yep. Well, I definitely want to thank you for taking the time to chat. I know it's great to catch up with you, and I know we had a couple mix up.
Yeah.
But always
Regrettable.
always a great time to chat with you. And next time you have something that you'd like to talk about, you're more than welcome to come back, and we'll chat about it then.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. That would be great.
All right. Well, have a great evening, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.